recording, we can start. Okay, so Lori Lee, you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Let me just, sorry folks. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Conversations on Anti-Racism Week. My name is Laura Lee Phillips. I'm the Director of Community Innovation at Impact North Shore, and we're the convener of the North Shore LIP, North Shore Immigrant Inclusion Partnership, also known as NSIIP. So first, I would like to acknowledge that the land we live on is central to who we are. It keeps us grounded, provides stability, and carries generations of wisdom. And although our paths are unique to each one of us, our footprints share a journey with the earth and all those who have come before and are yet to come. I grew up in Mi'kma'ki on the east coast of Turtle Island, and am a proud mixed Haudenosaunee woman whose ancestors are from the Mohawk Nation and Kahnawake. Today, I'm joining you from the unceded and ancestral traditional lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam people. This week's sessions are hosted in partnership with the Burnaby Intercultural Planning Table, the Burnaby LIP, the North Shore Immigrant Inclusion Partnership, the North Shore LIP, and the Surrey LIP and Tri-Cities LIP. And we do our work with service providers. And these folks include settlement service organizations, local employers, municipal entities, RCMP and police, provincial ministries, educational institutions, and community organizations. And as community planning tables, we seek to enhance the engagement, planning, and coordination of newcomer settlement and integration efforts with a collective goal of making our communities more welcoming and inclusive for all. Today's session will explore anti-racism through the perspectives of faith leaders in the Christian, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions. And our conversation this morning will be a 2-hour session, including Q&A. I would like to note that the session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared after the event along with the evaluation. Turning your camera on is optional, of course. However, we do ask you to please keep microphones muted. If you have questions or reflections that you would like to contribute throughout the conversation, please share these in the chat box. For today's session, our chat moderator is Noemi Soros from the Surrey LIP. In Canada, as in many other regions of the world, we know that racism is not a thing of the past, but rather an everyday reality for many people. This country has deep roots in racial violence. The systems, structures, policies, and institutions that govern and guide our communities were built with the explicit erasure of Indigenous peoples in mind. And more recently, faith communities in Canada have become increasingly vulnerable to hate crimes and attacks inspired by racist ideologies. In turn, this has heightened the urgency with which faith leaders from diverse traditions have come together in solidarity with political and community leaders to become more vocal and educate the public about the harms and impacts of violent, hate-based incidents. At local and global levels, we've also seen protests against different forms of racism and greater commitment to learning and unlearning about racism at a systemic level. It's imperative that this work continues, and we must continue to find new, innovative ways to address the intersections of faith and race in order to create the possibility of building safer, more inclusive, and equitable communities. I would now like to introduce you to the moderator for today's conversation, Eddie Goldman. Eddie is the Associate Director of External Affairs at the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or CIJA. As the advocacy agency for the Jewish Federations of Canada, CIJA represents the perspectives of 150,000 Jews across Canada affiliated with the Jewish Federations and approximately 30,000 Jews here in BC. CIJA is dedicated to preserving and protecting Jewish life in Canada through advocacy and working to combat anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination in all its forms. Eddie works with diverse faith and ethnocultural groups to build bridges of understanding and work together on issues of common interest and concern. And when she's not working, she can usually be found enjoying the outdoors with her husband and 5 children. Eddie, it's now my honor to turn it over to you to introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to be over here. Wanted to introduce, we're very grateful to be joined today with Tariq Tyab and Yusuf Siraj, both from a Path Forward. Tariq has has 25 years experience in the community service. He has built interfaith bridges and helped empower Indigenous, Black, and people of color communities, or IPOC communities. Tariq is the co-founder of Faith-Based Community Convener for Anti-Racism Initiatives in the province of BC. He is also the co-founder of the Muslim Food Bank and Community Services, the Muslim Care Center, and Islam Unraveled. Talk about, somebody who definitely has a lot on his plate over here. Tariq serves on the board of SAH Community Hub and is the former executive with the BC Muslim Association. Tariq, thank you for being here today. Yusuf has 10 years experience supporting the IPOC community students, faith, and community organizations. He is co-founder, together with Tariq, of a Foundation for a Path Forward, as well as the former executive with the BC Muslim Association and a co-founder of the Muslim Care Center. Thank you both so much for being here and joining us today. So a lot of people on this call don't realize that we've known each other for, I think, over a year now that we started working together, that we've had the privilege of working together tremendously on anti-racism initiatives and working together as people of different faiths. So it's really nice being here with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective today on how faith has an impact on racism.
Ready.
Go on, Yusuf.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you for that warm introduction.
Of course. So let's start with faith perspectives on the intrinsic human value and how it affects the views on racism. I'll just quickly, I guess, say a little bit about the Jewish tradition, and then I would like to hear from both of you about how you see this from your faith traditions. So in the Jewish tradition, there is a story that most Jewish school children learn in kindergarten or grade 1. It's a story about a Jewish man who wanted to know what Judaism is about. And he went from rabbi to rabbi, and he went to one rabbi whose name was Rabbi Akiva, who is a great rabbi in his time. And he said, "What is Judaism? Explain it to me in a nutshell. What is Judaism?" And he said the Hebrew words of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which in English means love your friend as yourself. The rest is commentary. We teach this to our children from such a young age because we want our children to understand from the time that they're very young, the most important value, which is to treat others with respect and dignity with which you want to be treated. In kindergarten, that might be sharing your crayons and your toys. And as they grow up, they understand more and deeper, on a deeper level, how it is that you want to be treated. Can you share some of the universal values of different cultures, including Islam, which I understand is your faith tradition, Buddhism and Christianity, and how does that affect racism from a faith perspective?
Well, I think we're going to start by showing our sincere appreciation to the organizers of this event, including Anna Maria, the Burnaby Family Life team, yourself for joining to moderate. It's really amazing when we get such a collective of like-hearted people together to be addressing these shared challenges. For today's presentation, we kind of put together a brief presentation that will touch on a few of the issues. It's by no means comprehensive, but just to give an understanding for a lot of our viewers, where we as faith communities can look at these challenges in a perspective that, as you said, highlights our shared humanity, our shared value and dignity for one another's, and the perspective that faith has a role to play in anti-racism work. I'm going to share my screen now, and then we're actually going to take a bit of a journey before getting into that question, because I think understanding the importance of cultural competency and how that can lead towards a better appreciation for others is important. As we say in Islam, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of the Creator, the Compassionate and Merciful. It's our traditional way of starting an event. For today, I'm honored to actually be out of Canada for a conference in Florida. and I'm currently on the traditional homelands of the Miami and Shawnee peoples, who, along with other indigenous tribes in this location, ceded their lands to the United States in what was a treaty of Greenville in 1795. However, Foundation for a Path Forward is based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we have always strove to acknowledge and work with our allies within communities that are trying to work towards truth and reconciliation, particularly with the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, on whose lands we work, pray, play, and learn. Our commitment to truth and reconciliation with the First Peoples of Turtle Island, which is a traditional understanding for North America, helps inform our vision of how the anti-racist work that we need to do can start to take place. It was, in really basic terms, the very first colonist crime that happened in North America, which was the destruction of peoples, histories, languages, and religions of the indigenous people here. So helping to bring awareness, build bridges, and appreciate the struggles that they are going through as we help them as much as we can to rectify that are principles of truth and reconciliation that we strongly adhere to. Foundation for a Path Forward, as introduced, is the faith community convener for the province of British Columbia. We have multiple programs that are running that address anti-racism, as well as issues of mental health support, coding and job security for IBOC communities, Leading Voices podcast to hear different narratives and stories from people across the spectrum, women's and girls education programming and gender support, anti-racism roadshow and happy hour, where we go and try to build the bridges in the grassroots community, the interfaith exchange, which is one of the ways that we actually connected with the Jewish community many years ago, and through Temple Shalom, Rabbi Philip Bregman, and many of our allies and friends across the board. It was a foundational project that is ongoing. And refugee support, environmental support, taking a holistic approach of bringing communities together in order to address the shared challenges and concerns that we all face. We're going to start today by taking a brief look at how culture, people, and faith can build cultural competencies, the understanding and appreciation for one another as a way to work together for a betterment of Canada. When we think about cultural competency, it really is a set of a few things. Number one is the behaviors. This is how we act with one another. Through compassion, mercy, and patience, we're able to build a human connection based on different actions in the real world and also in the virtual world, which we'll get to later on. Our attitudes, in essence, what we think about others, how we think about them, and the effort we make to understand them. For instance, in today's presentation, we'll be touching on the aspects of faith traditions that are not necessarily our own. How do we go about doing that? How do we educate ourselves and try to always have the best presentation of another's belief system? Is something that helps build a better appreciation for our fellow Canadians, because we're trying to look and see the world through their eyes and their perspective. In essence, improving our worldview by understanding that of another. And finally, we have policies. Now, these policies can both be organizational. For instance, at Foundation for a Path Forward, one of our core policies is anti-racism in everything we do. Or it could be institutional. For instance, it could be with the University of British Columbia and their effort for truth and reconciliation with the Musqueam First Nations. Or it can be governmental. So we have municipal, we have federal, we have provincial and First Nations governments, all of which have policies that encourage the growing together of a community by better understanding and having competency in the lived experience of another. Cultural competency really enables us to work effectively in today's multicultural Canadian mosaic. To make cultural competency either both our pursuit of it as individuals or the training of it as an organization more effective, we always look at 4 factors that need to be present in our minds. The first is something called cultural dynamism. Cultures don't stay the same. things are always evolving and changing, sharing and learning from one another. Faiths are like that as well. There has been so much shared thought from the various faith traditions around the world over the centuries. We learn, we grow, we understand the different concepts of where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. By understanding from other people's perspectives improves our own. Within a practical application of being here in Canada, cultural dynamism implies that there could be immigrants who come from one country, have unique characteristics, but change over time to fit the new place they're in. Most culture came about as a resolution to problems in a unique situation or environment that was passed down from generation to generation because it solved problems for those people. Here, for instance, where we are in Miami, they would have a different solution to problems as they would in, say, Nunavut, because of the different environment and culture. So we're an understanding that things do not stay the same, they change. The second thing is cultural safety. We have to appreciate that not everyone understands our background. Not everyone is conscious that there are differences that exist and that have to be understood so that we can better work with other people to achieve our shared and common goals. Cultural safety puts at its center the idea that this requires work. It is not something that just happens by nature. We all have to commit to better appreciating and engaging with others. Cultural humility implies that even though we love, respect, and value our tradition, we don't try and make it seem as though we are superior to others because of it. This is the common thread that we see throughout supremacist organizations, whether it's white supremacists or others. Not that they love themselves, but that they start to feel superior to others and hate them. And finally, cultural responsiveness. When we have two elements come together, there can either be friction or they can combine and work together for a positive change. Same with culture, same with religions. We here in Canada in particular have an amazing opportunity to show the world how multiculturalism can work practically for the benefit of everyone, for the increasing and understanding and appreciation and enjoyment of our lives here together. When we look at practical steps in this goal to be culturally competent, the first is compassion and respect. This is the key. These are also key elements in many, if not all, of the world's faith traditions. When looking at the core element of human interactions, our relationships with God or gods change in different faith traditions. However, when we look at the appreciation for human interactions, compassion and respect for the other is always incredibly heavily emphasized, because that is what shares us through an appreciation of, say, the golden rule, which is to treat others the way we want to be treated. That is through compassion and respect. When we know our biases or make an attempt to better understand them, we can see, for instance, how our lives have been shaped in a certain way to give us a perspective that might not necessarily be true towards another. When we start to look at stereotypes, whether they're, say, gender-based stereotypes or racial-based stereotypes or religious-based stereotypes, geographic stereotypes, that people from this city are that way, people from this faith believe all that, we start to understand that, hey, wait a minute, maybe our understanding is incomplete, maybe it's wrong. Again, tying back to cultural humility. We look at how our policies and procedures are inclusive. We try to understand from the perspective, as an organization, are we doing everything we can in order to better be inclusive of others? And we can always ask, is our staff diverse? And diversity in a very specific way, diverse to the community we come from, represent, and serve. So if we're in one geolocation where there's only, like, say, one type of person, then we have to think about what is the community we're supporting, and are we reflective of that community? This is incredibly important in government. This is why diversity in government, elected officials, is something that we highly advocate for, and we work on bringing out the vote for various communities, including working with government, working with corporations, and technology companies. And I've mentioned that for a very specific reason. 83% of people in tech are white and male. And this, unfortunately, in STEM in general too, does not reflect the user base. So when we can see it from that perspective, we can also better understand how having a diverse staff that matches our demographics is important. When we have access to diverse resources, we appreciate, understand, and empower organizations and institutions providing support services that are different than what necessarily are our own. And then programming. Is the programming that we're developing only focused on our own understanding of the problem, or are we actually engaging with the communities that we want to help? This is very important when working with faith communities as we do, because there's closely held beliefs that we understand that we'll never be perfectly proficient in another person's lived experience or faith tradition. However, we can always strive to learn and improve upon our programming as a cultural and organizational and personal perspective. And then sharing culture. The Institute for Policy and Understanding from the United States has released information showing that, in essence, discriminatory beliefs, whether that's biases, racism, or hatred towards another identifiable group, are reduced by 50% by merely just having an engaging conversation with those person in an honest way. The sharing of culture is not something to be avoided. It's something to be celebrated and respected and done in a very proper manner. The faith traditions generally quantify that as breaking bread and sharing salt and having a food engagement activity with the stranger or with one another. When looking at the considerations of challenges we're facing, the stereotypes and biases that we're all familiar with facing communities, for instance, our brothers, sisters, and friends in the Asian community have faced tremendous stereotypes and biases and attacks due to COVID-19 misinformation and disinformation online, resulting in real-world violence against them. We also have to be considered about the interconnection of diversity and the different dimensions behind it. It's not a black and white, it's a rainbow of colors and understanding. And the person's family experience, their religion, their culture, their acculturation to the new experiences also helps to inform our engagement with others, that people have multiple different shades to them. And when they come to a situation, it's not always with one stereotyped belief. When we expand this concept, we can start to look at how religion plays a part here. Now, before I get into this segment of the presentation, does Eddie, do you have any comments, or does anyone have anything they would like to share before we jump into this?
Oh, thank you, Yusuf. This has been just so much, a tremendous amount of information, and I just love how you're talking about, especially like the sharing of cultures. That like, in order to improve our relationships with each other, being able to work with one another and being able to talk with one another. It's really just been, I think a lot of what our work together has been actually, right, is really just, at the same time as appreciating our faith and traditions and our cultures, and yet being able to understand another person's culture and tradition. And in that way, understanding the other cultures and where they're coming from. It's not one is better than the other, but rather, just being able to work together. I'm not sure if you want to expand about that on that a little bit, but I really appreciate, that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're talking about here is addressing one of the main human challenges. It's a psychological and sociological problem, where appreciation, love, and value for the traditions that we hold to can sometimes translate into dehumanizing and degrading other people's faith traditions, for instance. Now, this happens for a few reasons, and I believe the primary one is ignorance. When people are ignorant about their own tradition and are unable to effectively explain, defend, or understand it, when someone presents them a counter narrative or a different worldview, instead of saying, well, I have my beliefs and I love them and I value them, and you have your beliefs and you love them and you value them, they attack. So in Islam, there's in the holy book that we have, which is the Quran, which we believe to be the word of God through the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad, and from which is the foundation of the religion. There is a surah, or a chapter at the end of the Quran where there's a verse that says, to you be your way and to me be mine, right? The understanding here is that there are different ways. And if someone wants to follow their own path in life, then they have the right to do so. The understanding that and this is when supremacist ideology. Now, there have been Muslim supremacists in the past. There have been Christian supremacists, Black supremacists, white supremacists, and white supremacists are the main threat to Western countries in today's world. We just did a major event on that 2 days ago, where the whole idea was to talk about how this ideology spreads, the impact it has, where it's going, and the threats it has. For instance, we'll touch on this later, the translation of supremacist ideology. My way is better than your way, and your way has to be destroyed. In essence, that's what it is. To real world violence has resulted in many attacks in Canada. And unfortunately, Canada is the leading country for murders due to Islamophobia amongst G7 countries. There's been many attacks against faith groups, including Christian churches that have been burnt down, Jewish community centers that have been attacked. And the reason why these things happen is not because someone loves themselves, because they start to hate others. And the core reason they start to hate someone else is because they don't understand themselves and they don't understand someone else. So they start to, have a victim supremacist mindset. We did a 2-hour presentation on this. I'm not going to go too far into that idea, but to get right to what you said, when we understand who we are better able to appreciate other people. We're better able to understand our shared human journey, the shared struggle that we're all on. In essence, myself, I'll share this with you. When I went down the path of better understanding my faith, why am I this way? Was it just because I was born this way? Well, that's not good enough for me, right? I want to know what is the most defensible position in my best understanding of truth, to connect with what I believe to be the creator of this human experience. That path forced me to question my beliefs. You have to have a heartfelt initiative to say that I want the truth no matter the cost. When then you can start to say, well, wait a minute, maybe these biases that I held are incorrect. Maybe this cultural worldview I had was inherited. It's not necessarily true. Or maybe you can say, yes, this makes perfect sense. I will stay with this. I will stick with this and I'll learn from it. It's a journey and a path. And when we appreciate that we're on that path, we can better appreciate that everyone else is too. And then we can have compassion and respect for all peoples as we collectively walk down this journey. Does that kind of answer the question, Eddie?
Yeah, no, this has been definitely very eye-opening. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think we'll touch on some of these concepts in this part of the presentation. And so, folks, when we look at how religion, which belief systems, but particularly the adherents of those religions, the people in them, can alleviate racism, we need to emphasize 3 key things. And these 3 key things are shared across all major world religions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, Jainism, and all the other ones that exist and are equally respected. And they are, number one, the understanding of humanity's unity, that we have different tribes and nations and different people, but we are united as humanity. Number 2 is the emphasis on just conduct, the idea that there is a moral responsibility to act justly towards other people. And then universal beneficence, the appreciation for kindness, mercy, and compassion towards other people. And we see this across time, space, geolocation, ethnicities, races, backgrounds. These are the uniting and main themes. There have been instances historically and contemporarily where people misuse their own tradition to try and put down others or to attempt supremacy because of their understanding. But those are the minority. They have always been the minority. They have always been the minority because they do not come from the mainstream understanding of human unity, just conduct, universal beneficence, which are the core of the world's great faith traditions. When looking at human unity, we can understand that, in essence, racism is based on perceiving people in a certain way. Now, those people can be from different ethnic backgrounds, which are considered alien, the other. And, we do the great work with Rabbi Philip Bregman and on the Other People Initiative for schools. The idea is that, people see the other as a threat. which is a psychological thing, but it doesn't have to be, especially in today's world. The other person whose feelings and needs, they don't need to be considered. That's, you know, you're less than human. My race is superior. We don't need to think about you. Now, realizing,
I'm sorry to interrupt. You know, Yusuf, you just mentioned the other people. I obviously know what you're referring to, but some of the people on the call might not. Do you want to just briefly just explain the amazing work that you do for the other people?
Absolutely. It's a fantastic initiative that is, in essence, taking leaders from different communities, the Black community, Asian community, Jewish community, Indigenous community, Sikh community, Christian community, and saying we all face shared discrimination or racism and misunderstandings from other communities. For instance, like we've spoken with Muslims who said, I've never met a Jewish person. And we spoke with Christians, I've never met a Sikh person, Indigenous people who've never met a Black person. So there's been no understanding between certain communities with one another, and at an individual level in particular. Now, the other people came about because there was an appreciation that schools and education is where a lot of this starts. Many organizations have brought in, like during the George Floyd protests, for instance, and the cultural improvement of understanding about Black Lives Matter and addressing anti-Black racism, people would bring in a Black speaker. During the terrible revelations in the public consciousness, it's always been known, but in the public consciousness of the residential school catastrophes, that people started to bring Indigenous speakers. However, what we're trying to say is that, in essence, the challenge is beyond one community. This is a issue in Canada, that we do have a cultural mosaic, but the pieces aren't touching. There's spaces between them. This is siloization of communities. Tariq, who's here, and I, our favorite way to describe ourselves is as silo busters. The challenge that we've seen in educational context is that students, they might only see one or two speakers or worldviews, but not understand the lived experience of the Canadian mosaic. When we approach anti-racism through this perspective that everyone has experienced an element of discrimination or hate, we can better appreciate our experience when we learn from others. So we've had community leaders come in, such as in the Muslim community, Tariq spoke for the Muslim community. We had Rabbi Philip Bregman for the Jewish community. We had Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Minister of Justice and the first elected BC chief for BC, from the Indigenous community, Terry Young, who is the chair of Success, as well as inspector for the VPD, Vancouver Police Department's Diversity, Inclusion, and Indigenous relationships. We've had speakers from the Sikh community, the Black community, and others to go into schools together and say, ask us about our lived tradition, ask us about who we are, understand where we come from, and say that we're all together in this work, in this effort. We've touched hundreds of lives of students. We have a few more events coming up. I think West Point Grey Academy is the next one. Yeah, West Point Grey Academy will be the next one. And it's really to help students better understand and appreciate that the Canadian mosaic only works when the pieces touch each other, not when they're separated. So that's kind of like, and in a nutshell, there's a lot more, but in a nutshell, that's what the Other People initiative is about. Unless you have anything to add, Eddie or
Yeah, no, perfect. It's just, I thought it was important to tell the participants on this call a little bit about the work that you're doing. And I know that you've been reaching so many students through the initiatives that you're doing, and starting from a young age is exactly what's very much needed. Instead of after the problems exist, is starting from when they're younger and help while they're still developing and understanding. So the work that you do there is fabulous.
No, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it is.
Right, that's what this is about, right? That's
no
what
one's
this
born racist. No one is born hateful. It's a lived and learned experience. These are anecdotes, right? So examples of racialized people growing up in different homogenous racial communities. So for instance, African immigrants growing up in, say, Japan, they identify more as Japanese than they do Black. Or, because you're in an ecosystem, all your friends are one way, all your community, your language, everything is one way. So you start to see yourself through the majority perspective. And when someone comes up to you and says, hey, no, you're not that, you're something else, people are like, well, this is how I identify, this is how my culture is, and that's through learning, through education. So we can see how important and impactful it is. The same thing on the flip side with racism, discrimination, and hate towards others. It's either through indoctrination, which is, the negative form of how people are misusing education to teach conspiracy theories, lies, or hatred towards others, or lack of education, which builds fear and mistrust and misunderstanding. So those two feel, and to this point, if there's anyone on the call who works with the school boards in BC, we're more than happy to bring about the other people to your school to learn about this initiative as well. You have Anne Marie's email, and I'm sure she can connect us. Can we carry on? Is there anything else we can touch on that? Because it is an important and impactful thing, and we're going to actually be doing another event on Monday. So for the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, that's going to be just to showcase the work, and then we'll be promoting it. Anna Marie will send you the link so that you can share the finished event with our stakeholders, and I think that will give everyone a really great concept and understanding of the Other People initiative.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Yusuf.
Thank you for bringing it up. When we jump back into looking at humanity's shared unity, when we realize that the common ground that we share as human beings on this earth together, we can start to break down the perceptions of otherness. And you see this when, for instance, people get married, or people form new relations. A stranger became a friend, became a loved one. So it's very possible that we can start to increase the understanding of what family is, and open our hearts to have mutual care, support, and kindness to others. Now, religious adherence, there is a fundamental importance for them to do that because of their belief system. So it's not just an intellectual exercise, it's part of faith, this human concern that we have a common ground in traditions. A few examples, by no means exhaustive at all, are to start the Tanakh. Am I pronouncing that right, Eddie? You're here with me, so your husband's a rabbi, so I'm going to double check the pronunciation.
Yes, I mean, it's probably easy for you to say it because the ch sound is something that's common in Islam, but I know some people have a hard time with it, but we pronounce it the Tanakh. So the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, it teaches that all humans are honored creations of God. And I'll quote in English the meaning of, "Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. God saw everything that he made, and indeed it was very good." My understanding of this verse is that it's very profound, that humankind as a whole had a direct source. We all came from one place. That creation in and of itself was good, right? That humanity is a good species, that we're good people, and that we all have a shared connection to explore and to understand and to engage with one another with. The unique appearance and example of each individual. So we have humanity as a whole, then we have individuals. The unique appearance of each person is praised by God as a wonderful work. The meaning of which, "For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb." We're speaking to God. "I praise you, for I'm fearful and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and I know them very well." So not only did, as I understand, God create humankind in his image, according to the Tanakh, and he made it beautiful and very good, but that each person from that shared humanity was wonderfully made. Whether you're Black, you're wonderfully made. Whether you're Asian, you're wonderfully made. Whether you're Muslim or Jewish or Christian, you are human, you're wonderfully made. That is a shared understanding of the the unity and value of humanity. In my faith tradition, in our faith tradition, the Quran affirms that God created humans from an original pair and orchestrated the subsequent diversity of humanity. The understanding in English is
O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into races and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah, which is the Arabic word for God, the creator, shared by Arabic-speaking Muslims, Jews, and Christians, are the most mindful of him amongst you. And his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the diversity of your tongues and colors. Indeed, in that are signs for those who know. We believe God created us this way on purpose for a very good reason. Not that we're superior to one another, but that we can learn and share and have our different traditions and backgrounds and appreciation. And what is God valuing the most? It's consciousness, God consciousness, and the appreciation of understanding and connecting with the divine questions, the divine realities that we all sharedly ask about. Human beings, in essence, are one family. We have brothers and sisters and friends from different colors, backgrounds, races, ages, and traditions. But from faith traditions, which is the core theme of today's talk, we believe that we are all one. And this is shared by most faith traditions. There's different flavors of how that's explained. However, the concept is there. Now, religion teaches that humans are united in striving towards a shared destination. So not only can we see that there's an understanding that we were created on purpose this way, and that we are all good, and that we should learn from our different tribes, colors, and races, but that we all have the same destination, which is this path of understanding that we are collectively on. When you see someone who's struggling at the same thing you are, you develop empathy and sympathy for them. No matter what the human being's personal understanding at the moment, we're all learning, we're all growing. No one is stagnant. If we go back to the beginning of the presentation, the idea that cultures change can be applied both at a cultural population level, but also at an individual level. Our understanding of and appreciation for our tradition and other traditions improves, changes, does all kinds of things. It's not just us, we can say that everyone goes through that as well. For instance, in the Buddhist texts, it's taught that humans are in a struggle towards liberation from suffering. The Abrahamic traditions depict life of the journey from the divine back to the divine. And all these traditions really imply there's a lifelong struggle to think and act with goodness to get to our shared outcome. We appreciate that there are differences. We appreciate that there are unique ways of viewing, but we see them as a good thing, not as a negative thing that we should feel superior to, which is the heart of racism. Now, since we share the same spiritual challenge, we came from somewhere, we're here, and then we're going somewhere else, the understanding of that, it behooves us to really cooperate together on this collective goal, because it helps support, when people work together, you get a better outcome. This is true with everything. So why not also with faith and religion? Our shared outcome should be something that unites us. Even though we look different, we talk different, and we have a different way of seeing things. Before I get into principles of just conduct, do you have anything to add, Eddie, or anyone else maybe wants to mention that? Because that is a core idea. It's a meaty subject, the shared human unity, or if I can just keep going.
It's what I saw was a pattern personally. I saw a pattern that's something that even though one was from Jewish view and one was from the Quran and the other was from Buddhist, but yet there's still a connection that, it shows to me, and tell me if you think otherwise, that it's different ways of viewing what's essentially the same. Is that, man was created by God, or however you view that, but mankind was created, and that we're on a journey. We're on a pathward journey. The Jewish tradition of that God created man and he saw that it was good, and now we're on that path of life. And the Quran, how also just there's different races and different tongues, but that yet we're all one. And the Buddhist tradition that was talking about a struggle of a journey towards life. So it's definitely a very meaty subject of creation over there, but of man, but yet it's also talking about how basically how mankind is, humanity is all here together, and we're all, we look different, we have different beliefs, we have different, but yet the beliefs aren't also different. That's what it's showing. That's what it seems like to me, at least.
I agree completely. Like in a nutshell, we all came from somewhere, we're all here, and we're all going somewhere else together. This is a shared human experience. That concept of shared humanity leads into the next concept, which is just conduct. If we all have the shared experience, then how justice or just conduct in particular, which is the behaviors, it becomes an important part of our religious life, especially in striving for anti-racist behaviors in today's world. So we take what we're learning from today's presentation, but it has a practical effect on how we act right now and tomorrow and thereafter. So the spirit of fair treatment to different ethnic and cultural groups can actually be found in religious texts. The Tanakh, for instance, says, and the Tanakh, because it's the Hebrew Bible, it's relevant to Jews and Christians, which, with Muslims are, I think, over 60% of the current world population. When a foreigner resides among you in a land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing amongst you must be treated as your native born. Love them as you love yourselves, for you were foreigners from Egypt. I am the Lord your God. A commandment from the Most High, the highest authority, that when we see a foreigner or someone who is different than us and has come to us, you can appreciate the context of this when you think about what it would have been like to be a traveler in the past, or what it's like to be, say, a refugee today. You have no connections with where you're going. You might not speak the language. You might have left because of a problem, suffering, famine, war. We see it today in Ukraine. 3 million people have been forced out of their country due to conflict and are going to countries where they don't share necessarily the same language. For most, are going to Poland. Poland's a Catholic country. Ukraine is Ukrainian Orthodox, so different faith traditions. They have different languages, Polish and Ukrainian, and yet there's been a wellspring of compassion for them. And we always look at the good and highlight that. And the challenge that we as faith communities sometimes might get into is we almost tend to cherry pick the verses that are talking good about us, and kind of like forget that we have a responsibility for just conduct towards those who are different from us. We have to always appreciate that the importance of being for instance, in Islam, Allah, God, the creator, commands justice and excellence in doing good and bringing charity to the relatives, and forbids obscenity and what is deplorable. In fact, the one of the religious fundamentals of Islam is something called zakat, which is charity, and part of it is mandatorily used for people who are foreign, who are traveling within your land, who have no sustenance, who have no connections. We can see that there is an importance here for appreciating the otherness of people and caring for them, not just recognizing it, but mandated, as we see by Lord God, right? That we have to take care of others, even though they're different. If we had that attitude in our heart, how could we have racism? How could we see someone different than us coming and saying, hey, I'm not from here. I am not from around here, right? I don't know your ways. I don't understand your religion or your life. And instead of seeing that person as a threat, we see them as a blessing, because now we have the opportunity to follow our concept of just conduct. The ultimate perspective here is universal beneficence. Our appreciation of difference, our appreciation for justice leads to this. I will give only 4 examples. There's many, many, many examples from all traditions that talk about this concept. The Buddha, which, obviously Buddhism comes from India, so the sub-Asian continent tradition. May all beings be happy and secure. All beings, may they be happy-minded. Let all beings, including non-human creatures too. Let none deceive another, nor despise any person, whatever in any place. In anger or ill will, let them not wish any suffering to each other. Imagine if we were able to see that in action around the world. Would we be racist? Would we be saying that this person is Muslim, let's not, care about them? Would we say that, oh, this person is Black, let's not care about them? No, we wouldn't. the value of today's presentation is to show that faith traditions, which are held by the majority of people around the world, should be used to bring us together, to share along this journey that we're all on, not to divide us. You gave a different source, Eddie, but the one that I came from was Rabbi Hillel, which said that that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entirety of the Torah. And the rest is interpretation. Now go and study.
I know that one also.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
as I said, like,
that's an ethics of our fathers.
it is,
yeah.
It's beautiful. It is, legitimately simplifying so one of our goals today was not to get into theology. And the reason for that is because, number one, many people do find it boring. I love it. Tariq loves it, but many people, but also because we want to look at the human experience and what unites us and what the understanding from faith is to address racism. Very specific. So when we see it here today in writing and in understanding, we can really start to think that, wait a minute, there really should be no racism in the world. And how can we work together from many perspectives, the faith perspective just being one, like there's dozens, like, of how we can achieve that. Can be seen in these, like, for instance, Jesus, peace be upon him, said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. That is the greatest and first commandment. And what is the second one after that ultimate perspective of the creator of the heavens and the earth and everything is you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, we look around today, whether it's in politics, whether it's in geopolitics, whether it's in the cultural wars, are people loving their neighbors? I'll give you, this is a thought exercise for everyone. Do you even know your neighbors, right? Two sides and across the street. If you're in a house or in an apartment building, how many do we actually even know, let alone love? It is a challenge of modernity. I share it with you. However, it stops us to start to think about this. Do we get to know different people? Do we get to know the other person in order that we can address these shared concerns, such as racism? Legislation is not going to fix this. It's human connections that will help to build together a shared appreciation for our lives together as culturally different, but connected. And lastly, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, none of you has faith until he loves for people what he loves for himself, and until he loves a person only for the sake of Allah Almighty. Meaning we go even beyond the understanding of reciprocity, or that we should love them because we have something to gain. Shared love and beneficence for humanity as a whole is an important fundamental part of faith traditions, as I understand it, as we understand it, for countering racism, discrimination, hate, biases, and many of the world's ills today, and in the past, and most likely in the future. So that concept is something that I wanted to share a little bit about. Like, we believe that there's incredible importance in better understanding and appreciating this. The next part of the presentation is going to talk about what happens when this does not work. What happens to a faith community when they're discriminated against? And we use Islamophobia for this because that's our lived experience, and we can speak to that the most. This part of the presentation, my colleague and dear friend Tariq Tyab is going to be doing. But before we get into there, if you have anything to add, Eddie or anyone else, before we jump into this part of the presentation.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for the first part of this presentation, which has been, I see also just the amount of research that you and Tariq have both put into this. I know if I, as a Jewish, person, had to start looking into what does the Quran say about this, what does the New Testament say about that from the Christian, it's the amount of research that I could imagine you looking into the different faith perspectives is tremendous. I do see that there is a question that I'm not sure if you or Tariq would like to answer. The first one is from Jessica Walker, who says, could you speak to the impact of religious outreach or evangelism, the Christian term? And how does the religious outreach connect with racism? Is this practice compatible with anti-racism? So I think that what she's asking is, how does religious outreach, I guess, of a specific religion, does that affect or connect with racism?
Sure. And actually both questions kind of tie into the same thing. So the second question is, can you speak to the connection between white supremacy and Christian supremacy?
Right.
So in essence, evangelism is something shared by not all religions, actually. However, the world's largest, and there could be a correlation between evangelism, spreading the faith, inviting others to it publicly, and the sizes of the religions, right? So when we're talking about anti-racism, we're not talking about belief systems. We're not saying that my understanding and path to truth and the creator and how I choose to live my way comes from the Islamic tradition, or comes from the Christian tradition, or comes from no faith tradition, but a humanist understanding, or comes from Buddhism. Those are, like, in essence, not to kind of make it smaller, but in essence, those are the menu items, right, in life. Understanding. People tend to understand and appreciate one more than another, which is, how can people get to their beliefs? How do we get to beliefs in any way? There's nothing wrong with us talking about our religions. I think it's a good thing. I think, like, to have that understanding and appreciation. And for people who want to adopt it, that's fine. What happens is when you get into issues of force, or when you get into an understanding that not only do you love your religion and your belief, and that you feel that it should be something that guides you towards ultimate truth, but then you say anyone not following that is now less human than you, or that they are no longer to be appreciated as a person. That is where we get into the concepts of the concept in evangelism in Christianity, or dawah in Islam, the same concept here, which is to invite others to your faith, right? Now, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. However, what happens, and this gets into the core of the second question, is the supremacist aspect is not that you love or respect your tradition, it's that you dehumanize and devalue others. These concepts exist across human society. They are destructive, and they do not tie in with the mainstream approach that many people, especially here in Canada, for instance, that we have to understand these things through. We are living together. We cannot hate each other, and there's evidence to support that from within the religions. You can use anything to justify whatever you want. At the end of the day, people use religion to justify violence. They use it to justify slavery. They use it to justify, subjugation of women. I think in Canada, women weren't considered people until like 1920 or something like that, right? And it's true.
Right.
And this is because of the misuse, and then you get into power structures and things like that. The purpose of today's call is to focus on the core elements of faith and how it's united in addressing racism. Now, we showed you the examples from the scriptures and from the examples of these faith traditions. To best understand this issue, it's the difference between what we best understand to be truth and follow and invite others to, versus to those who don't have that, to dehumanize, degrade, or hold negative views towards them because they might not have understanding. And I've said it many times, our understandings as human beings change. Let's be generous and kind and allow others. Let's allow the other, the stranger, the traveler, the new person, to have the exact same respect and dignity that we have, because as we've seen, we're commanded to do so from a faith perspective, right? So I think that kind of answers those questions. Now, going beyond that would be a different subject matter if we get into kind of the theology of where these things go. I myself am not a scholar of religion, so I wouldn't feel comfortable to get into that, especially outside of Islam, like let alone Christianity, but within these kind of concepts of supremacy in particular, right? Like, I think we're comfortable to talk about that. I hope those answer your questions.
I think so. And like you mentioned before, in the different faith, from each faith, basically talking about inviting and being kind and good to others. And yes, it is part of the faith. And like you mentioned, not everybody follows it, right? Just because you're a Jewish or Muslim or Christian doesn't mean that you're observant in all of its following. And I think that's a little bit about what the conversation is today. And I see Jessica is thanking us. It requires a lot of nuance, and I appreciate your thoughts. So we're looking forward to the next, how racism affects faith communities. Looking forward to hearing about this.
So I'm gonna turn the screen over to Tariq, and then he'll be continuing the presentation.
Thank you, Yusuf. Much appreciated. So part of our work and a little bit about my background, I'm born and raised in Canada, and I grew up in a small town in British Columbia called Fort St. John, which was a majority white community, Christian community, and also some First Nations community. So didn't grow up in a very diverse society, and there weren't that many Muslims, maybe one or two other families that were related to us. And as a result, didn't have much perspective other than the Canadian experience, hockey night in Canada, and everything pertaining to Canada I identified with. However, my name and my religion, although I didn't know much about my heritage, my family's originally from Pakistan and India, and although being born in Canada, I didn't really know much about the culture and heritage at that time. There wasn't that many people from my community where I lived. And so as a result, I do recall growing up, my neighbors who were Christian knew that I wasn't Christian and would take me to church every Sunday as a way to, I guess, introduce Christianity to myself. And they were very nice, very kind. The food was great. However, in my heart, I knew just it wasn't what I believed, but I appreciate my neighbors and friends for them caring for myself and taking me and sharing their culture and their religion. And so this carried forward to my teenage years. And in the teenage years, there was the first Gulf War in Iraq. It was when I first, when we moved to Vancouver, and I experienced a sense of being the other when the invasion of Iraq occurred, and there was starting to be a demonization of people from the Middle East and Muslim peoples in particular. And so in the high school setting, starting to feel, I've being treated different, being called derogatory terms. And then the onslaught of Islamophobia started to occur, especially September 11th, and then the second invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, of course. And so in the media, everyone on the call, I'm sure, has seen a lot of very negative stereotypes directed towards Islam and Muslims. Now, mind you, there's 1.9 billion Muslims in the world today. There's 52 majority Muslim countries in the world today. However, there's a stereotype that exists that somehow the religion and the people are inherently violent, which is categorically untrue. And the extremists, as Yusuf has mentioned, supremists or extremists, so whether it's the KKK or neo-Nazis on the one hand, or ISIS or Al-Qaeda on the other, they don't speak for the majority or the mainstream communities that they claim to represent. But for some reason, the media keeps perpetuating, and disinformation, misinformation online keeps perpetuating this Islamophobia, or another term is called anti-Muslim bigotry. So as a result, what has occurred in the Canadian context, as Yusuf had mentioned, in the last 5 years, starting with the Quebec mosque shootings in 2017, where a white supremacist gunman came and shot 6 Muslims in the back while they were praying at a mosque, the first of its kind ever in the history of Canada, that people were killed in their place of worship. And then shortly after that, a couple of years later, a caretaker of a mosque was killed by a neo-Nazi white supremacist Satanist whose throat was slit. And then last year, the Afzal family in London, Ontario, 4 family members were run over by another white supremacist terrorism. So obviously the term terrorism, for some reason, whenever people hear that term, they equate it with Islam and Muslims. However, white supremacist terrorism is alive and well. And according to the FBI and also here in Canada, the government of Canada, the domestic white supremacist terrorism is really the biggest threat facing Western societies today. So starting with Islamophobia, and our presentation is just to kind of give you a bit of nuance, a bit of understanding. Again, here in British Columbia, we have close to about 100,000 Muslims. Other hats that we wear, we're part of the the BC Muslim Association, which represents about 100,000 Muslims, 17 mosques across the province. And in Canada, there's close to about 1.5 million to 2 million Muslims across Canada. So a significant number. Canada's population is about 35 million. So a significant number of Canadians are Muslim Canadian. Again, 52 countries represented, Muslim majority countries from Europe, Asia, South Asia, Middle East, Africa, from every walk of life and background. So there's a lot of diverse thought and opinion and beliefs in the Muslim community, and in no way is it completely homogenous, as somehow there's a perception of homogeneity. Okay, and so again, just to repeat, a very diverse community, culturally and ethnically diverse, and various levels of religious commitment. Some practice, some don't practice at all, and they maybe observe the annual Eid, which is the end of Ramadan, where we have a big festival to celebrate the end of Eid. And then some are very observant, and they do much more than their 5-time prayers, and they try and follow the religious traditions and beliefs as best as they can. So definitions: Islamophobia, anti-Muslim bigotry, prejudice against or demonization of Muslims or Islam, which manifests itself as an unfounded or irrational fear and or hatred of Islam or Muslims or people perceived to be Muslim, leading to violence and systemic discrimination. So Islamophobia is gendered, meaning 70% of attacks on Muslim people in Canada and around the world in multicultural societies are against women, because women that wear hijab, they're obviously immediately people recognize that they are Muslim, and as a result, either Muslim women face verbal abuse. Sometimes it doesn't get much publicity whenever acts of racism or violence happens against Muslims. But last year in 2021, 20 Muslim women in the city of Edmonton were attacked, beaten, punched, kicked to the ground, rocks thrown at their cars because they were visible Muslims, and they were the intersection of wearing hijab. They were women, and they were from African countries, so they were Black as well. So, and then more heinous than that is legislation to ban women from wearing hijab in France. Like, so again, you know, Canada is a free country in the sense that people are free to practice their religion, but certain bills in the province of Quebec to somehow outlaw or make illegal the wearing of religious symbols. And so again, a woman's right to choose. So again, I am a Muslim man, so I can't speak for Muslim women, but if those of you that know Muslim women, and here in Canada, nobody can force anybody to wear a hijab. There's a stereotype, there's this kind of misinformation that somehow Islam forces women to do any act of worship. Nobody can force anybody to do anyone. I have 5 kids, or I have 4 kids. I can't get them to make their bed. So honestly, this perception that somehow Muslims force women to do things, it's completely irrational, and it's completely false. And this is a common kind of misinformation, disinformation to kind of legitimize prejudice against Muslims, that somehow Muslims oppress women. One key aspect is the country of Afghanistan and the concept of the burqa. So Afghanistan has a tribal culture that has existed there even before Islam. So these tribal cultures and traditions are actually part of their tribal culture, but somehow people equate certain cultural aspects of Muslim majority countries as the mainstream view, which is categorically untrue. And then again, the key term of dehumanizing Muslims leading to violence. So case in point, on a very massive scale, propaganda, the 20 years bombardment of Afghanistan, the Iraq destruction, the destruction of Libya. So again, you know, people, the perception is Muslims are terrorists or are violent. However, you know, nation destruction, you know, but but Muslims are accused of being violent and terrorist. However, in the last number of years, many Muslim countries have been destroyed in civil war as a result of Western countries invading and bombing these countries, destroying their societies. And yet Muslims are called terrorists. So victims of Islamophobia. So again, as I said, 70% of victims are women. And then 17% of all hate online is directed towards Muslims. So interestingly, the Freedom Convoy and some of the organizers all started and made their bones in Islamophobia 5, 6, 7 years ago, creating kind of a lightning rod of uniting far-right groups in anti-Muslim bigotry, Islamophobia, and then they latch on to these populist kind of themes, most recently the Freedom Convoy. And so a lot of that hate is circulated online, disinformation, misinformation. There's a book called The Islamophobia Industry, which shares that certain groups actually put a lot of money into this to promote in the media, in online, perpetuating stereotypes about Islam and Muslims to keep this certain understanding or this prejudice against Muslims alive and well in the public consciousness. So as I mentioned earlier, the Quebec City mosque shooting, 6 people killed, 5 injured, several children orphans by a white supremacist terrorist. So to preface what happened then was, this was around the time when Donald Trump was elected, and he initiated the Muslim ban. And so the shooter in Quebec City, he consumed a lot of this anti-Muslim content online, and he posted an image of himself with a MAGA cap, the red MAGA cap, the Make America Great Again cap, before he went and he did the terrible shooting, the horrific shooting. So world events, what we've learned in our work is that world events actually inform real world violence. As Yusuf mentioned in his presentation, that with the coronavirus, this misinformation online, trying to demonize Asian Canadians and Americans and people of Asian origin, and to somehow blame them for the coronavirus and then harm them. And the Vancouver Police Department released a statistic that anti-Asian hate increased by 717% in the beginning of the pandemic. So again, world events inform real world attacks against racialized communities. So I mentioned the Toronto Mosque attack, where the caretaker was killed by the Order of the Nine Angles, which is a neo-Nazi Satanist group. And then the Alberta attacks against Muslim women, 20 attacks reported last year, Black, women, Muslim, most attacks remain unreported. In the British Columbia context, Muslim women typically get harassed on transit, on the SkyTrain, on the bus, at bus stops, at supermarkets. And generally speaking, Muslim women that wear hijab, if they're alone, generally they get targeted with verbal and then at times physical assaults, which has happened in the last few years. So this is a survey by Angus Reid, Religious Trends from 2017 and National Research Surveys. So this is the Canadian view of Muslims. Again, this is 5 years old, but it has some relevance today. 46% of Canadians have an unfavorable view of Islam. Less than 50% would find it acceptable for one of their children to marry Muslim. 56% believe that Islam suppresses women's rights. And 52% feel that Muslims can be trusted a little or not at all. And 42% think discrimination against Muslims is mainly their fault. So kind of like, just it's fine. Whatever happens to Muslims, it's their fault. And then 47% of Canadians support banning headscarves in public, compared with 30% of Americans, which is shocking. And then 51% of Canadians support government surveillance of mosques, as compared to 46% of Americans. So in previous administration in Canada, there were actually paid intelligence agents that were assigned to be in mosques to sit in mosques and to inform on the Muslim community. And so that was a very common thing where the intelligence agencies in Canada would call Muslim leaders for private meetings, and there's a lot of suspicion, and again, a lot of government surveillance of mosques as this inference or this kind of prejudice that somehow mainstream Muslims have some sort of risk factor for Canadians. So now, where the rubber meets the road. So sometimes, and we've heard this in Canada in our work, that some people have said racism does not exist in Canada. So we've heard this and we're like, really? Racism doesn't exist in Canada? Shocking. And so, so evidence, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? So one of our project partners is a technology company called Moonshot, which has a data sharing relationship with Google Jigsaw. And what that means is Google shares key search terms related to hate content categorized by different racialized communities. And they can do it, Google can share it, and then Moonshot, what Moonshot does is take the data and kind of identifies it according to all the keyword terms to racialized communities and down to the country, the province, the city, the postal code. What are the common hate search terms that Canadians are searching for? And so British Columbia, you know, although we are smaller in population than Ontario, however, taking into account the type of searches that are being searched, British Columbia actually rates higher in percentage ratio of people searching for hate-related content online. So this is a snapshot of Vancouver, of different postal codes and different types of hate searches that people search for. And these are sadly neighbors of ours that in different postal codes and city and areas in Vancouver that are searching these search terms. So for white supremacists, they search keywords like Hitler was right. So Hitler is right, and this is horrible. Like, you know, again, in this time and age, 2022, people are searching for content related to Hitler in this manner. So, and then in terms of coded terms, so 1488, the vast majority of us won't know what that means. So if you see that number, you'll be like, oh, it's just some number or whatever it is. So what does it mean in white supremacist terminology? It's a combination of two popular white supremacist numeric symbols. The first symbol is 14, which is shorthand for the 14-word slogan. So this is white supremacist ideology, which is manifested by all these white supremacist shooters that have perpetrated acts on various communities throughout the Western world. So their slogan is, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. And the second is 88, which stands for Hail Hitler, H being the 8th letter of the alphabet. So if you ever see HH, that's just coded term for Hail Hitler. And terrible that people still, again, idolize Hitler to this day. So now the key words or their ideology, the Kalergi plan and the Great Replacement Theory, and the nutshell is that Muslims, Jews, people of color are conspiring to replace white race in the Western world. And the solution is to kill all of them. That's
Hey there, did the recording just drop for everyone or just us?
Yeah, just for a second.
No,
Tariq
we just
is-
lost Tariq.
I think we just lost Tariq.
Okay, 1 second. Let me just put this back on. I think we'll continue from there. Does this come through?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
coming. Yeah, we got it back. Thanks.
sorry about that, guys. Technical difficulties here. So
I think everybody's used to that from 2 years being on Zoom, so it's all good.
thank you. So now, what is the #1 hate search term when it comes to Islamophobia? and anti-Muslim bigotry. And when we first heard this, Yusuf and I were dumbfounded, and we started laughing because it was the dumbest thing we'd ever heard. So the term, the number one search term for Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry across Canada, the United States, and Europe is remove kebab. And so those of us on the call that have had kebabs, like, kebab is it's a great food choice. We enjoy it. However, it has a more insidious history. And where does it come from? So in the 1990s, during the Bosnian and Serbian conflict, the Serbian militias that were conducting their genocide against Muslim populations of Bosnia, they played a musical anthem called Remove Kebab. And so that was an anthem. If you go on YouTube, it's on YouTube, Remove Kebab. And in New Zealand in 2019, the Christchurch shooter, when he was live streaming his murder of 50 plus people in 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, he was playing this actual anthem in the car while he was live streaming on his way to the first mosque. So in these white supremacist communities, and the term is transnational white supremacist terrorism, they have slogans, they have musical anthems. So there's a great subculture that unites these communities, and sadly, they number in the millions of people. And so Facebook, YouTube, Twitter have been used with coded terms, but many of them have gone to the dark web and on other platforms like Telegram to organize and to propagate hate content, and to like in the case of these Canadian white supremacists that murdered the 11 Muslims in the last 5 years, they would publish manifestos on these white supremacist chat boards to state this is what they're doing, and then they go and do it. Okay. So just to recap, what is spreading online hate and real world violence? So what we learned, and again, very naive in this work 5-6 years ago. What we did was we wanted to make our Muslim community feel very comfortable reporting incidents of Islamophobia, whether it's verbal abuse, physical abuse, because a lot of times people are afraid to report to the police because they're afraid of being on a list that, oh, I'm a Muslim, and if I call the police and they're going to surveil me. And in the case of new immigrants that are in process of getting their immigration or their refugees, they're afraid if they complain to the government that they may be refused their immigration status or their visa. So they don't want to make any complaints at all because they're afraid of losing their kind of immigration status because they're complaining about Islamophobia and racism. So what we learned in this work, by first engaging law enforcement to come to our mosques in the sense of community building and to encourage our Muslim community to report hate crimes and hate incidents. So Friday is the day of Sabbath for Muslims. We call it Jummah, and that's when our weekly prayer, where the vast majority of Muslims come to do their weekly congregational prayer. So we would have a brief presentation by law enforcement officials, and many of them were Muslims, to talk about the need to report hate crimes in the real world. And so when we had conversations with law enforcement, what is motivating people to want to harm Muslims, either physically or kill Muslims? And this was an honest question that I had. And the hate crimes people from the RCMP said a lot of it is disinformation, misinformation, and online hate is what's driving prejudicial beliefs amongst people against Muslims. And so I was dumbfounded. I didn't realize. I was like, unbelievable. So we went to a church, which was a United Church, again, a progressive church, which happened to be 3 or 4 blocks away from the most populated mosque in British Columbia, the Surrey Jamia Mosque. And so the key questions we usually ask is, have you ever met a Muslim before? And they go, no, never met a Muslim before. Never met a Muslim before. And then we said, and then what do you know about Islam and Muslims? So I had very angry women that were grandmother age, saying you oppress women, you enforce female genital mutilation, and Islam is violent. And this is like, wow. I was like, and so the pastor, and she was really very wise. She prefaced the kind of conversation. What would Jesus forward in an email? What would Jesus forward in an email? Because the disinformation that was being circulated in these communities about Islam and Muslims, much of it, majority of it, or all of it categorically false, and demonization of our community had been circulating amongst these groups, and people were having this hardened prejudice and bias towards Islam and Muslims. So again, these are the key search terms. Online hate, we believe, is what's in part and in large part driving real world violence against racialized communities, Jews, Muslims, people of color. Online hate is a key driver that is driving real world violence. So conspiracy theories, searches, the Great Replacement, white genocide, generation identity. So generation identity is to indoctrinate Caucasian youth to white supremacist ideologies. And so again, trying to make Hitler a hero, which again, perpetrated the Holocaust, millions of people killed, yet they're still, they, for whatever reason, Hitler was right. Anyways, it speaks for itself. Sadly, how these communities unite around this ideology. And then for anti-Asian hate search terms. So incidentally, Muslims, 62% of Muslims worldwide are from Asia. So that's meaning Indonesia's 200 million Muslims, 100 million Muslims in China, in Philippines, 30% are Muslims, in South Asia, meaning India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, 600 million or so. So the vast majority of Muslims are actually not from the Middle East, but majority are from Asia and South Asia. And so so sometimes the intersectional hate of Asian hate, but also Islamophobia happens with our Asian Muslim community. So some of the common tropes that are perpetuated about Chinese Canadians are that they're spies for the Chinese Communist Party, and different memes that dehumanize Chinese and Asian communities online that motivate people to have a prejudicial, dehumanized view of Asian folks, resulting in real world violence against them. And so, again, we have the data. Anyone who would like the kind of research reports from Moonshot that kind of show these kind of data sets from Google, we can share that with the folks afterwards. And in my neighborhood, I live in the UBC area. The highest concentration of hate search terms, sadly, are from the UBC area, according to Google, which is shocking. And Muslims are the most attacked group online at 17%. And so practical solutions. So this is from the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And what they do is they lobby the government when certain things happen regarding the Muslim community, similar to, I think, what CJ does for the Jewish community. So NCCM, in a similar way, advises government regarding the Muslim community. So some of their recommendations are how to address violent Islamophobia is pass street harassment bylaws with ticketing authority. So if there's an incident of verbal abuse against a Muslim or any person of color or racialized community, that there be bylaws initiated by the local government with ticketing authority. Other recommendations they have for addressing systemic racism is community funding for local anti-Islamophobia initiatives, and obviously for other communities as well that are also targeted, and build anti-Islamophobia mayoral advisory circles and councils, and again for other communities as well. Public education campaigns to confront Islamophobia. So what we've done with what Yusuf talked about, the other people, we actually do that as well on the road at various cafes at a neutral setting to invite leaders from all the various communities to come together and have an honest discussion about race and racism and community building and relationship building. and according to the research from an American think tank, that by just sitting down, breaking bread, having a coffee with a community that you've never met or talked to or had any kind of personal relationship with, by having such a meeting, that brings down prejudicial ideas and sentiment minimum 50%. And so we have another one coming up, the Anti-Racism Roadshow in Salmon Arm. And so that's in the Shuswap. And anyone who'd like to join us from different communities, we'd be happy to host them as well. And then celebrating the history of Canadian Muslims. So Islamic Heritage Month is in October. And then invest in alternative measures to community policing, so community partnerships and engagement. And so really getting people comfortable in our community, which has had a lot of mistrust with law enforcement, to be comfortable to report these incidents and bias so there could be recourse. And then increase opportunities for young Canadian Muslims in city decision making. And so part of it is encouraging Canadian Muslims to be involved in the political process, to run for political office or volunteer for and be part of mainstream societies. And as Yusuf and I, we love the term silo busting, that we need to all work together equally with equal value and respect in order to create societal change. So that is our presentation. And if you have any questions, Eddie or anybody, please feel free to ask myself, or I can turn it over to Yusuf as well.
Thank you so much, Tariq. I really appreciate it. You know, it's interesting, you have all this data, and I actually just this morning saw, so this is like really brand new, that the Stats Canada just released hate crimes report, where for 2020, we've been waiting to hear like what the stats were. And this is from 2020, which means it's probably from the year before, but this is the latest data available, that in the year 20, among reported hate crimes, so I'll refer to what you had mentioned yourself, is that there's way too many hate instances, which is different from hate crimes, right? A crime is, you know, is something that's punishable by law, whereas hate instances, you know, it could be somebody harassing, which might not be constituted as a crime. But in terms of hate crimes that have been reported in 2020, the Jewish and Muslim populations continue to be the most frequent targets, accounting for 62% and 16% of the crimes against a religion, respectively. So unfortunately, there's still, this is just, you know, just adds to the data that you have released. You know, you said a lot about online hate, and it's actually something that us at CIJA that we actually started a coalition that some people might be aware of, called the Coalition to End Online Hate. Again, you know, coming together as people from different communities that are all targeted online, trying to advocate with the government. And there has been movements in terms of, you know, what could be done going forward. But I guess just to paraphrase from our perspective, we know that online hate leads to real world violence. That it's really as simple as that. Unfortunately, the Jewish community has also seen a lot of it. Most famously, or infamously, I guess I should say, was with the Jewish community in Pittsburgh, where there was 11 congregants who were killed during Shabbat services on Saturday morning. But there was also a lot of, you know, a few different ones that happened in a 2-year span, mostly in the United States, which was, there was a stabbing in a New Jersey supermarket. There was, or a shooting rather, in a New Jersey supermarket. There was in Halle, Germany. There was in Poway, where there was one person killed and others injured, but they were saved because of what they knew. But a lot of this, where the perpetrators were inspired by what they've seen online. I don't know if there's anything that, let's say, somebody just on the call here today, what could you say? You see online hate, what can you do about it? You're muted, Yusuf, I'm sorry.
Sure. Oh, sorry. There. So Tariq and I were sharing the
Yes. I'm sorry. I knew that it was sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'll definitely maybe speak to that a bit. The challenges that we're seeing with online hate are derived from a couple things. Number one is human psychology. So we tend to focus and amplify negativity, which we see as threats to ourselves, much more than positive or kind of neutral news stories or content. In media, there was a famous saying that still holds today for our social media world, which is, if it bleeds, it leads. In essence, what draws people's attention is what gets promoted. Now, the human mind is really afraid of othering, of differences, or of content that you can see as being, hey, this might be a threat. That's how people fall into conspiracy theories. That's how people take cherry-picked data and stats to fit a worldview or a perspective, especially if something happened to them and they're afraid of the experiencing happening again or happening to others. Then they take a bit of information and then see it as being all that there is. A great example of this, which ties into point 2, which is social media algorithms and how to address that challenge, is if you were to Google, police crimes against Black people on YouTube, you would start to get a set of videos that would make you believe that this is happening all the time, everywhere. And if you were to Google, police helping Black people, you would start to think, hey, everything is great, there's no problems. Those are 2 examples that I've tested myself. I mean, I read about it, but then I tested and it's real. Like, the second component of online hate is how social media algorithms in particular, where most of this content is seen and experienced by students, by youth, by IBOC community members, and by people vulnerable to supremacy, comes about. And the reason for that is that social media is designed to be an attention seeking technology. All right, so the more attention we give to these sites, the more ad revenues they make. There's a business model here. So with attention, the algorithms start to provide more negative information, more aggressive, and like it kind of puts his people into these echo chambers where they start to experience more content, watch more videos, see more things that fit a narrative. And that narrative usually tends to be negative. Once you start getting down that path, that funnels people down into more extremist content. So you start on Facebook, then you go to YouTube videos, then you go to white supremacist forums, for instance, right? There's many examples. Then you go to dark web forums, then you go to private Telegram encrypted chats, and then you get radicalized to violence. At each one of these steps, there's a way to address it. So with social media, the best thing to do is flag, report, and capture online hate. So in fact, that's why we're in Florida. We're at a conference here talking about Hate Shield, which is our solution for that. We're actually piloting that with University of British Columbia. So that's exciting stuff to address that first level, which is the vast majority of people are experiencing hate content. And then the second level, which is, these kind of websites, well, we need to have them deplatformed. And these are websites that are not freedom of expression. They're specifically calling to violence, which is illegal in Canada and the United States, and for many platforms. And then when we understand that, then we can move down to addressing how people are getting to those websites. So there's a process called the redirect method, which Tariq mentioned, research coming from Moonshot. So we're connected with them, and this is an open source technology. So we use it. Basically, it helps bring people using evidence-based approaches away from searches that lead to violence or hate towards things that build empathy. So not countering their narrative, mind you, but building human empathy, which then they themselves are empowered to counter the narrative. Because if you provide counter content, what happens is people usually double down on their previous beliefs. We've seen this with QAnon conspiracy theorists. We've seen this with even, before that, there was a lot of right-wing extremists, Muslim supremacists such as ISIS. It's the exact same thing. So this solution was developed to help bring people out of that kind of path to violence. Ultimately, that's what we're focusing on, right? So the weaponization of social media is a challenge that all of us have a part to play in, whether it's identifying, flagging, capturing, or helping other people get out of it. Currently here in Florida, I will say that there is a very cultural value for freedom of expression. And in Canada, we have, freedom of speech in America, freedom of expression in Canada. Yeah. However, what we're talking about when addressing online hate is not that. It's the weaponization of that, which leads directly to violence. It's a very separate thing. In fact, it helps protect people's expression. One of my our good friends, Evan Belgord, who's the director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, he says more thought should be given to protecting the freedom of expression for the Black immigrant who's working 3 jobs in Canada and who's just going online to share her day versus a neo-Nazi who's trying to insult and attack and get rid of them. So perspective changes.
Yeah.
That's a bit about that. Like online hate is, we can go into that in a lot of depth, but is there anything specific within that in addition to what we mentioned, or that's okay?
I think, I see that there are a couple of other questions here that I know we have about 10 minutes or so before we have to wrap up, I think. So I will see if there's anything I could, I'm just gonna kind of read through it very quickly. What are the reactions you are finding? Sorry?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see, there's one question here that, what are the reactions? Oh, this is, I think, back to the other people. What are the reactions you're finding from students when visiting with the schools, and what age are they? So I guess just very, very briefly, like
high school students.
High school
reactions are very positive because they get the opportunity to ask tough questions. They get the opportunity to learn directly from people who are not, so they're not representing all of their faith. They're representing their lived experience as a member of that faith, which is a key distinction. And that key distinction is what actually helps to build these relationships and appreciation for the other. So if I were to come here and say, hey, my name is Yusuf Siraj, I represent 2 billion people, alive today from a faith tradition that is 1,400 years old, that, every language, every continent, from, Spain to but my understanding and my experience of it. And there is a couple questions. I will touch on this. It's a bit outside of the context of this, but just so people can maybe have some food for thought on it. The idea of oppression of women and, the idea of forcing people to wear a hijab. I got a couple texts privately about that. So I'm just going to.
Oh, please.
Yes. I'm a man. Okay. Thank you. I have no lived experience with this. And the best person to ask is someone who actually wears a hijab, which touches on the importance of what I said. We have to get to know each other. So here in Canada, you will find women wearing hijabs. If you're friends with them, say, hey, I was just wondering about this, and then get their opinion, because no one's forcing them to do it here, right? It's a lived experience. In countries or cultures, and so this is how we should see things, because again, our biases. In countries or cultures where anyone, particularly women, are forced to behave in a specific way, whether that is cultural, such as binding one's feet in certain Asian cultures to look beautiful, or elongating one's head in Aztec and Mayan cultures, which Tariq and I were just at, so it's fresh off the top of my head. The forcing of an action to fit a cultural narrative exists across human societies. What we're talking about today is faith. No one is forcing me to wear a Hawaiian shirt. No one is forcing my sister-in-law not to wear hijab or to wear it. The problem of using any reasoning to force someone, to oppress them, is a global challenge experienced by women differently. I learned today that in Canada, Indigenous women didn't have the same rights as their white counterparts until 1960. We have to think beyond the stereotypes and misunderstandings. There are cultures where oppression by a certain group of people is experienced in a specific way. Yes, there are places where women are forced to wear certain clothes, but then you have other countries and other provinces in Canada where they're forced not to. It's the same thing, two sides of the same coin. So expanding.
That's a very interesting perspective.
Like this is all about cultural competency. Like I'm not upset by these questions. Like someone who lived in a cult, I'll give you an example. If you lived in a place where someone forced you to be someone you're not, forced you and said you go to hell if you don't do this, or we'll torture you or put you in prison, and you left that place, well, what kind of worldview would you have towards the people who made you do that? It would be negative. Like I don't like to be forced to do anything, right? In fact, I became more of a more practicing Muslim, doing my best to practice after I left an environment where I was expected and forced to, right? Well, not forced in a harsh word, but like, this is what you did. I chose this, right? Everyone has the right to choose their path in life, and anyone who gets in the way of that is diminishing their agency and their ability to connect with their creator on a more truthful level. So yeah, like we should think about these issues within a holistic sense. There are places in the world where women experience a lot of gender-based violence and gender-based oppression, but it's not unique to one religion and it's not unique to one culture. And I think that is the key takeaway for that question. I hope that it might not be what some folks want to hear, but it helps us to broaden our appreciation and understanding. And I hope that provides some more context.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I honestly, I hear that as an Orthodox Jewish woman as well, right? The women are subjugated, the women are forced to do something. If you ask my husband, he won't think that he's the one in charge. There's definitely perception of things. Not that I'm a boss, but I'm saying there's definitely a very, very equal footing in most Jewish marriages. But the perception from outside can be different. And I think that what you were saying is that even though, correct me if I'm wrong, but even though in some Muslim countries, women may be forced to wear whether it's a hijab or the burqa, it doesn't mean that women that you're seeing here in Canada are being forced to do so. They're doing so of their own choosing. Is that?
So basically the idea with this issue, it ties into stereotypes of Islam being anti-women, and I can see why people believe that. I totally understand and appreciate it. A lot of people, that's their lived experience. People who came from, say, Somalia or from Afghanistan or parts of Saudi Arabia. However, when we talked in the very beginning of this presentation about cultures changing over time, when I lived in Saudi Arabia, women couldn't drive. I was there, my parents were expats. They couldn't drive, they were forced to wear certain, that's not true anymore, right? Now, if it's not true now, it might not have been true before, and it wasn't. Ibn Battuta, the famous traveler, so look him up, guys, is the Travels by Ibn Battuta. He did more than Marco Polo, yet no one knows about him. He was actually a judge, a scholar, and he went to Mauritania and then to the Mauritius, and there was Muslims there, and their culture was topless women, okay, topless girls. That wasn't sexual, just that's how they rolled. He went there and he like blew his mind, and then he was like, you know what, just please, when you come to my office, just put something on, right? So like when we look at across history and across the different geopolitical times and spaces, in Egypt, when my dad was growing up, no one wore a hijab, yet they were all Muslim. In Iran, before the revolution, most women didn't, even though they were Muslim. We see the challenge women face, in particular, like patriarchal organizations across history have always enforced a certain standard on women. Now, whether that is how they dress, how they behave, how they act, that's, women were considered in Europe, they were considered literally chattel and, possessions, like to be traded, and like you get some land, you get like concepts that we today might not agree with at all.
We can't really understand it because it's such a different culture.
It's a human problem. It's a human problem. A direct criticism of Muslim countries comes from a perspective that it is a unique Muslim problem, which is not true. That is not at all true. So when we get beyond that appreciation and understanding that this is not unique to Muslims, this is a human challenge, such as extremism. Many people, when they think of the word terrorist, and everyone on this call, I give you the opportunity to be honest and think about this. When I say a terrorist attack, what kind of person comes to your mind first? Statistically, it's a white person around the world. Like, who creates most terrorism is white supremacists. In Europe, it's like 94%. I don't say that to bring down white people. I'm half white. My mom's white. She's French Canadian. So it's not at all that. It's just that the world we see might not be the world how it is, especially when we talk about how faith is and how it's applied. Whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, at times and places, it's not applied in the way that most people would think it. And when it comes to women in particular in Islam, there's no compulsion in religion. That's a Quranic verse. There is no compulsion in religion. You have your path. Now, if someone has a different appreciation for that, that's their path in life. As we said, we're all on this journey. Now, this concept is best addressed by someone with lived experience. I've done my best to explain my understanding of it, and I hope it helps to broaden our perspective that around the world, women are facing a lot of difficulties. In particular, there's a whole UN SDG about this. It's like there's a challenge globally, and I hope with that appreciation in our heart, we would be more understanding of others.
Thank you so much. So I think that just looking at the time, I think it's obviously something that we could sit and talk about for a very long time, but we're coming to our end. So I guess in closing, we spoke today about the intrinsic values of humanity, We spoke about racism and racism from different faith perspectives, or rather anti-racism from the different faiths. We spoke about the effects of online hate, the practical effects that it has on us as a community, and the real world violence that we've seen from it, as well as the practical steps that some of the communities could do, or some individuals can do as individuals, not just as part of a community, when confronted with hate of different types. I guess just to close from a Jewish perspective, like what my faith says, I mentioned at the beginning the story with Rabbi Akiva and Yehavta l'reacha kamocha, which means to love your fellow friend as yourself. There's also a Jewish teaching that some of you may have heard of, which is, it's from the Talmud, but I've seen it on magnets even. I've seen it all over, that he who saves one life, it's as if he saved the entire world. It's an intrinsic teaching that each and every person has in inherent value, intrinsic value. And every single one of us has, what we learn from it is every person has a role that only I could play, that only Yusuf could play, or only Tariq could play. That's specific only to that person, something that Yusuf could do that nobody else in the world is capable of doing, because you have intrinsic value, and everybody on the call as well. And I think that with this as our guide, this is just one of the teachings that tells us that really, from a faith perspective, racism has no place in our world and in our lives. So I just want to thank the organizers of this call, and I don't want to name people for fear of leaving people out, but I know I've been in touch with Anna Maria, as well as Laura Lee, and obviously Tariq and Yusuf for your presentations today. I'm not sure if somebody else is going to be doing, I think Anna Maria, you were going to be doing a closing, so I will turn it off to you. Thank you for having me today. Anna Maria, you're muted.
Again. Here we go again, the end of the week, and still doing the same thing. So I want to thank you today, like Eti did. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you, Tariq. It has been a wonderful day, and it has been a wonderful closing of the week. I just want to do a little thank you to Len Pierre, who hosted the session on Monday around indigenous cultural safety. On Tuesday, Candace Knoll did the importance of equity, inclusion, and social justice from the system change lens. And on Wednesday, we have a wonderful day having youth organizing an event for youth, who was very successful and very interesting in stories that they share with everybody. And yesterday we had a DiAngelo having a fireside chat with Dr. June Francis from SFU. And then we have a beautiful close, like I said, with all of you. Totally agree with you with the words from Eddie. Yes, racism has no place, and we all have a role to play. It's just, we have to take conscious of who we are, what are we doing, so that we can have a better world for everybody. So thank you very much. Thank you, the presenters, and thank you to all the attendees for a wonderful sessions that we hosted this week. Have a wonderful end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Peace be with you. Take care.
Peace be with you as well.